Most people think they have an anger problem, but that's not the real issue. The real problem is how quickly they react, and over time, that habit quietly damages everything: their peace, their relationships, and their ability to think clearly. It doesn't happen all at once or in some obvious way. It happens in small moments that don't seem important at the time. A comment feels off, a message doesn't get a reply, or something doesn't go as planned, and almost instantly there's a reaction. It's automatic, it feels justified, and it happens without thought. But every reaction comes with a cost. Not always obvious, not always immediate, but it's always there. Energy gets drained, focus disappears, and most of the time the situation doesn't improve at all. Think about how often something small turned into something much bigger, not because of what actually happened, but because of how it was handled. One reaction leads to another, and suddenly something meaningless becomes a problem that didn't need to exist in the first place. This is where it starts affecting everything, especially relationships. Most problems aren't caused by major issues, but by constant small reactions: overthinking, assuming the worst, taking things personally, and reading too deeply into things that were never that serious. Over time, that creates distance, tension, and misunderstanding. Not because people are against you, but because reactions are happening too fast and without control. And this is where most people get it wrong. It's not what happens that creates the problem. It's how it's responded to. There's a moment, small and easy to miss, that exists between what happens and what you do next. Most people never notice it. They go straight from trigger to reaction. But that space in between is where control actually lives, and once you start noticing it, everything begins to change. At first it won't feel natural. The reaction will still be there. The urge to respond, to defend, to explain, it doesn't disappear. But instead of acting on it immediately, you pause, even for a second, and that changes the outcome. Because now the response is chosen, not automatic. And that one shift has more impact than most people realize. Think about how many situations in your life would have gone differently if you had just paused for a moment. How many arguments wouldn't have happened, how much energy would have been saved, and how much stress could have been avoided. Most people never think about that. They just keep reacting and dealing with the consequences after. But it goes deeper than that, because reactions aren't just external. They happen internally too. Overthinking is a reaction. Replaying conversations is a reaction. Creating scenarios in your head that haven't even happened is a reaction. And those are often the most damaging ones because they don't just affect a single moment. They repeat, they build, and they turn small situations into something much bigger than they actually are. The mind has a way of turning possibilities into certainties and assumptions into beliefs, and when that happens, something small starts to feel overwhelming. Not because it actually is, but because it was allowed to grow without control. This is where most people lose control completely, not to the world around them, but to their own thoughts. And here's something most people overlook. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everything needs to be analyzed, and not everything requires a reaction. But when reactions are automatic, everything feels important. Everything feels personal, and everything feels like it needs an immediate response. That's what makes it so exhausting, because your energy is constantly being spent on things that don't matter. Attention is limited. Energy is limited. And when it's used on the wrong things, there's nothing left for what actually matters. This is why control is so important, not to become emotionless, but to become selective. To decide what actually deserves a response and what doesn't. Because once you start doing that, things begin to feel different. Life becomes quieter, more focused, and a lot less overwhelming. Control doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means not letting emotion decide what happens next. Feeling something is natural, but acting on everything you feel is what creates problems. That's where most people go wrong. They confuse emotion with action, and once that connection is broken, everything changes. Situations that used to cause stress don't hit the same way anymore. Things that used to feel personal start to lose their weight, and other people stop having control over your emotions because you're no longer giving that control away. That's where real stability begins, not in avoiding problems, but in no longer being shaken by them. Now think about this honestly. How many times has reacting actually made a situation better? And how many times has it made things worse? And how much of your life has been shaped just by how quickly you respond to things? Once you start asking that question, it becomes hard to ignore. From that point on, every moment becomes a choice. React automatically, or pause and take control. At first it's difficult, then it becomes manageable, and eventually it becomes natural. And when that happens, something shifts. Life feels clearer, more controlled, and a lot less chaotic. Not because everything around you changed, but because your response did. So the next time something happens, pause, even if it's just for a second. That second is where control exists. Because not everything deserves a reaction, and the more you understand that, the more control you actually have. And the less everything else controls you. Now be honest with yourself. How much of your life has been shaped by reactions? And what would it look like if that stopped?